Welcome to Security Heroes, a podcast by Athena Security. We share real-life stories to help connect you to real heroes in the security world. I am your host, Lisa Falzone. Warning, the following recording contains potentially disturbing content. Listener discretion advised. So welcome to Security Heroes. Joining us today is Adam Coughran, president of Standards Training Group and SafeKidsInc Company, two companies dedicated to security and safety training. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So could you just dive a little bit more into your background and tell us what you've been up to?
Sure. So I come from a 20 plus year career in law enforcement out of Southern California. So during my career, worked a variety of assignments, our active shooter team for a very long time, a lot of specialty details, worked counterterrorism for quite a while, and also worked what we call tourist-oriented policing. So in some of our tourist-oriented areas, working with hotel groups and theme parks to help keep them safe and secure. And so kind of a byproduct of these specialized units originally became Standards Training Group. And I was just simply being asked, hey, can you come do some of the training that you do in your full-time police officer job for us over here in an area that, isn't covered by your city or by your agency. That's kind of how it started. And what I discovered over time was that there was really a need for specialized kind of information, or, I'd always say, hey, you always ask your friend who's a cop about something. What do you think about this or that, security related? And that kind of slowly started Standards Training Group. And then over time, working with so many schools and, pre-K through 12 education, noticed that was a market that from a safety and security point of view, especially when it comes to violence and active shooters and those types of things, wasn't really being addressed very well. And SafeKidsInc was a byproduct of really seeing a need in an industry for something that wasn't really being offered, and really trying to help teachers and educators on how to teach kids how to be safe. So today, both those companies still run, one very much kind of the adult hospitality, healthcare, tourism, those types of things, and the other K-12 driven.
Awesome. So what's the most commonly overlooked aspect of school security?
That's a really wide question because there's a few things, but what I would say is, from our point of view, one of the things that we see overlooked so much is the actual kids. We do so much by way of preparation, installing fences and cameras and all the technologies and, visitor management, all the things that are all kind of the staples and the puzzle pieces, so to speak, of school security. But so oftentimes, and kind of what we saw years ago was that we're doing all this stuff for teachers and we're doing infrastructure, but we're not really talking to kids much about how to stay safe or their own safety or what does kind of security mean. And once you started to include them into the mix, since they are usually the largest population on a school campus, now you obviously increase your security stance, you kind of increase the safety. And we took the viewpoint of, it's kind of like fire drills and natural disaster drills, right? I grew up in California. We did earthquake drills all the time. And I think all of us growing up did fire drills every month, where we engaged the kids on how to stay safe from very specific kind of things. And when it comes to kind of personal safety and security and those types of things, what we don't see a lot is the students engaged in that in a way that makes sense, that's in that age appropriate manner depending on their grade level.
So how do you get the kids engaged in security?
That's the $1 million question, right? And when we looked at it, it's like not only being engaged, but how can we do it that's age appropriate and trauma informed and all the things? Because if you're talking to kindergartners and second graders about scary things, we don't want to scare them any more than we have to. And we really took the viewpoint of being able to talk to kids in a way that made sense, really playing into what their fears are, like what do they think is unsafe things, and giving them very simple tools and things to do, like when it's okay to tell a teacher or a trusted adult about something, when you don't have to and you can react. You don't need permissions necessarily to get away from someone who's harmful or those types of things. And so, we really started kind of with that overarching kind of that active shooter response, because that's the buzzword. That's what everyone's kind of looking for. That's, if you're looking about school safety and kids, that's usually where most people start. But really, if you look at it, it's kind of like a life skill. Like we learned to evacuate out of a building for a fire, but I also know how to leave a building in any other emergency. It was kind of a byproduct of that. And so looking at it more as a life skill, not just this skill that they might use in a classroom, a skill that they take beyond the walls of those classrooms into their communities, and really doing it in a way that makes sense to them, and things and words and imaging and storytelling that they're used to for the little ones. And obviously as they get older, more problem-based solutions, working together in teams, fact-finding missions, those types of things that they're used to in learning other information in school.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed with my kids' school, they use event disaster training instead of using the word active shooter. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so terminology plays a big part of it, right? And
Right.
so we coin, kind of from our point of view, we coined it as the HERO program, right? And just
Mhm.
learning how to stay safe. And so HERO is obviously an acronym, but the idea is that we don't say the words gun, active shooter, death, killing, maybe. In fact, there's no
Right.
imagery of any their weapons. We don't talk about shooter because there's no
Right.
need to induce that to the kids, right? Or to induce kind
Right.
of lead them down if this is what's going on. Let's talk about safety in general. And might they leave it there because of something happened in the community or something that maybe they saw in the news? Yes, but it can
Mhm.
also lead down to other unsafe things or violent events that have happened in their community. And so having a skill to apply to that, not just narrowly tailoring it to one very specific thing in one very specific area, creates that more broad skill.
Yeah. So, what security technologies specifically should schools be considering to improve safety on campuses?
So I look at that in kind of a twofold kind of marketplace, right? You have current kind of established technologies. When I say that, that's things like cameras and surveillance cameras, right? That's been a long time established technology.
Yeah.
You look at visitor management now is kind of entering that world of established technologies with different vendors. Instead of being, here's our check-in list in a binder with a piece of paper. No, we're digitally checking people in. That runs a quick background check that looks at child
Mhm.
custody, that looks at things that, is this person supposed to be here? Are they a parent? Are they not? Do they have a criminal background, or are they on a registrant list? They're not even allowed to be around kids. Those technologies have now been around for the better part of 15, almost 20 years. And so that's becoming kind of those established technologies. So very basic things that most schools should have kind of center around that. And then I look at the emerging technologies. And so you look
Mhm.
at cameras and the introduction of, AI technology and cameras to identify certain things or to point out or alert to certain things. We're looking, the hot topic, obviously, as you know, is weapon detection. Are we only looking for firearms? Or are we looking for things that could be weapons in general? If someone's carrying a knife or someone's carrying a sword or a large stick or a baseball bat, is that person coming over a fence into a campus, or are they going through the normal ways? And so some of the
Yeah.
emerging technologies that are still, some of this is still a little bit on, I wouldn't say experimental, but a lot of it's still like this is generation one and generation two of
Mhm.
some of these technologies. And so a lot of the press you're seeing is sometimes the failures and the non-refinement of Gen 1 or Gen 2 style technologies to get to the
Mhm.
point where they have been around like cameras, like they have been around like these other things where become institutionalized where you use those things. So the early
Yeah.
adopters will take those technologies and they're going to have the stumbles and the bumbles, and it's the partnerships with the vendors to work through that and to refine the technology. Our program was no different 10 years ago. First time anyone's ever talked to kids about certain things, like we learn things along the way. And so
Yeah.
it's, if we look at it as a more of an evolution and a partnership in trying to keep everyone safe as opposed to wins and failures, we tend to see the technologies work far better with a little bit of a different mindset.
What do you mean different mindset?
Well, different mindset is that you'll hear a lot of times that, okay, we purchased a product, whatever that product may be. And for
Right.
whatever reason, it didn't work as intended, or it failed, or all of a sudden it didn't catch something. It didn't do something. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is garbage. This is junk. We spent all this money. We're never going to use it ever again.
Right.
And so I say change of mindset is like, okay, well, we're partners in making this work. And we realize that certain
Right.
technologies are new. And so when something didn't work, let's figure out why it didn't work. How can we make it better? How can we help the vendor make it better? And
Yeah.
then that way it doesn't happen again, as opposed to shelving something, or
Right.
just having, I don't want to deal with that anymore because it's too much of this or that. And so when I say those early adopters, that shift the mindset is that it's not a on or off switch. It works or it doesn't work. It's always an evolution. And I say security in general is always an evolution. It's not an end game. We don't get to a spot
Yeah.
and go, okay, we're done. There's always something else that's coming or evolving that we have to do.
Yeah, and like things are layers of security. I mean, nothing is, for lack of a better terminology, bulletproof. Like nothing is like totally 100%. So it's like just because something is not 100% doesn't mean it's not a layer of security that can help save people's lives.
Yeah, and I always talk about it as rings of security, right? So you want
Mhm.
rings of things around you. If you have just one ring of something and that fails, well, that's not very good, right? We might have 3 or 4 or
Mhm.
5 or 6 rings and technologies and things that are there to help or secure or protect or delay or avoid or defend and all these different things. And there's layers, right? So if the camera doesn't catch something right away, okay, well, there's probably 2 more other cameras that might, or there's also, I don't know, the people walking around that can see something that can also say something. If your phone doesn't have reception, well, that's one failure. But do we have some version of a panic button or emergency button, or
Right.
do we have our voices that we can yell to somebody else to do something, right? It's multiple ways to communicate, to see, to respond, those types of things.
Can you talk about like a specific instance when you implemented like a specific technology and how you did it?
I've seen some interesting technologies, and of course, looking through the broad spectrum of kind of industries over the years, school
Mhm.
technology, some of the interesting things I've seen in some of the implementations really come from the visitor management point of view. And I say that because, who we let into schools, depending on when or where they're there, right? So in the morning, obviously, all the parents are showing up. We're not individually checking in every single parent. We're running every single person, right? That just doesn't really make sense. There's no good way to do that right now where
Yeah.
it's rapid, right? But you look at during the course of the day, and what I've seen in the instances that I have either been a part of directly or have been kind of the primary source of backing things up is person shows up and something has changed in the background, right? Maybe child custody has changed. Maybe there's a restraining order now. Maybe something has changed. And that the fact of that, school secretary in the office checked it every single time, not just saying, "Hey, how's it going?" And they walk right by. No. We check every time. We issue the same visitor tag every time.
Right.
We do things, and all of a sudden you start to catch things that aren't routine. All of a sudden something has changed. The status has changed. Now that person's not supposed to be here. They're being, they're surreptitiously to do something that maybe they're not supposed to be there to do. I've seen
Yeah.
visitor technology or visitor management technology really help prevent a lot of what could be potential crimes or potential bad situations just by stopping them on. And we talk about those rings or layers of security. That far outer ring, you got stopped at the front office, never got on the campus, never got to a classroom, never got to wherever certain things are. I've seen that technology play out really well. And then anything that is really early warning, early communication. So, some of the emergent technologies, is we talk about these sensors and, we have fire sensors for smoke and heat, those types of things. But some of the security sensors, for lack of better terms, are listening for fight words or for violent type words, for scuffling noises, for movement noise. They're looking for things like vaping smoke and tobacco smoke as opposed to normal smoke, right? And these early warnings, like, hey, it sounds like that there's a fight brewing in the cafeteria, right? You have two people yelling loud or cuss words, all these different things, and so that technology coupled with some relatively advanced camera technology, and all of a sudden it alerts and brings up the cameras in the area in which the sensor's hearing these things. Now, if you have a security center, which again most schools don't, but we're talking like maybe like a hotel or a hospital or a retail center. Now, without even leaving their dispatch center, they can look at the cameras and confirm what it is that this the sensor's alerting to. And do we need to send security officers to respond? Do we need to call the police because there's been now a shooting? We hear a lot about the shot detection technologies. Again, that's another one of those emerging things. But like with any technology, what is it doing, right? And so shot detection is one kind of like a one-trick pony, right? It looks for one very specific thing. It can be cost prohibitive. And some of these other sensors are looking for a bunch of things. Right. And so now maybe the return, instead of just getting the sensor that is just gunshot detection, maybe we get it that does 8 different things to detect. So we're getting a little bit better return on what we're actually looking for. So those are all conversations that happen in some of those technologies.
Have you ever put some of these new emerging technologies in some of your clients and then gotten pushback from parents or investigative reporters, and how did you deal with it?
So there's been there was an interesting technology that got some pushback that was kind of unexpected. And even I didn't, and I usually have a pretty decent pulse on like what parents, like the parent sentiment and those types of things. And the technology was digital hall pass technology. And so in the same kind of vein of visitor management, who's coming in and who's coming out of your campus, there's some, and so instead of now having a quote unquote hall pass or potty pass, right, where you give the student a clipboard or something to walk, and so if they're roaming the halls, any administrator or teacher knows that they're on leave from a class with permission and they're not ditching, they're not doing things they're not supposed to be doing. The technology was let's do the same thing with visitors. Let's get rid of the archaic piece of paper or the clipboard or whatever it is, and with their essentially with their phone, they're digitally signed out the restroom where they digitally get signed back in. So it's just another way to kind of track student movements and some other things. And that it started with student pushback is where it started. And then the students started pushing back on it. And then the parents got wind of it. And of course, then the parents jumped on the student bandwagon. They all started pushing back on it. And it was something that on the face seemed very benign. It didn't seem like it was one of these controversial technologies that there was going to get spun up. But there was a lot of sense of kind of the quote unquote big brother. Well, if you're having me digitally check out like with a phone or some device, well, now are you tracking me on that device? And
exactly,
typically I hear that with teachers, oddly enough. So the pushback usually internally, if you take the parents out of the equation, is if you have apps that are installed on teachers' phones and they aren't issued a school or district phone, if it's on their personal phone, there's a lot of apprehension to that app on their phone. If the location services are turned on, those types of things. What are you tracking? Do you see where I go? Those types of things. So usually the apprehension of technologies on devices typically comes from teachers. But this time, like I said, the parents and the students were pushing back on something that I don't think anyone really forecasted was going to be a problem, and became kind of a little bit of an issue that had to be explained why and what the technology actually did and why we moved to this
Yeah.
versus not. And it eventually got settled. But, lessons learned is that both parents and teachers weren't really told what it was doing, so to speak. It was
Hmm.
just like, oh, we're using a virtual hall pass now. And I
Right.
think that spun up a lot of rumor and a lot of misconception, and those types of things is what kind of caught fire until it was finally quelled.
Got it. And how did you quell it?
Information. So it's one of those, and we've even seen, with the Hero program, if schools don't get ahead of parent messaging and say, hey, here's what the program is, here's the intent, here's some information about the
Hmm.
program, here's an informational video about the program. We're going to host a parent night to talk about the program, and we're going to
Hmm.
have someone from the organization talk about what it is and what it isn't, what it does, what it does not do. Because minus that, especially when you introduce any sort of security driven technology, parents are going to be kind of apprehensive no matter what it is, kind of
Yeah.
discovered over the years. And what kind of kills the apprehension right away is you answer their questions, and it meets the
Right.
expectations of what it should do, excuse me, and not what they think it's going to do, or
Right.
what they think it's not going to do. And so usually
Right.
quelling all of that ends up with just transparency and information. Like, here's what it
Hmm.
is, here's why we did it, here's what it actually does. It actually cannot do any of these other things that you're saying that you think it does, it might do.
Hmm.
It's not even possible to do that. What it is doing is X, Y, and Z. And then usually people are like, oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Um, and then, subsequently to that, once they figure that out, then they're like, well, is it expensive? Like, are we having to pay a lot for this? Because then, so then those are much easier questions to deal with than kind of the emotional uprising of, no, we don't want this. And why are you doing this? And so it's a much
Right.
different conversation.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Hero program and
Yeah.
just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, and so kind of going back to kind of the story earlier when we were kind of missing the stakeholder, so to speak, in the conversation of safety and security at schools. For since the Columbine, or I call it with the Columbine era, right? Since
Hmm.
that 1999-ish era is when we started seeing this uptick of school violence, and now it's kind of a thing, more of a thing than it was just a kind of an oddity or what we thought might have been a one-off scenario. And
Right.
during the course of the last 25 plus years, we have focused so heavily on, training for teachers and law enforcement training and, the response to these things and technologies around it. And we did all these things, but at the end of the day, we kind of forgot the key stakeholder of everything, which happens to be the kids that are actually at the school. And what I
Right.
started seeing I was an active shooter instructor for a long time, and I was teaching in schools and all these different organizations during my
Hmm.
police career. Now, obviously, my post law enforcement career. And what I saw in schools was like, yep, great, cool. But then every scenario that happened, and I had teachers ask me this before Safe Kids and the Hero program was around, like, how do I talk to kids? Because it's always Murphy's Law. We're not in our classroom when we had the
Hmm.
lockdown. We were at recess, or we were in assembly. We were on a field trip and something happened. Something happened at drop off or pickup. There's a substitute teacher that day. Any number. We're at lunch. And what happened is that, okay, we're going to teach run, hide, fight the teachers, and then we're going to practice a lockdown drill, and that should suffice. What we started finding is that we have issues where kids had to do something and their teachers weren't there. They were at lunch, or they were
Hmm.
not immediately around them. It wasn't in the nice, neat package. And so the Hero program was kind of birthed out of, how can we teach kids to stay safe and respond to violent type events? Obviously, starting
Hmm.
with kind of active shooter in a way that made sense. And so HERO is an acronym for hide, escape, run, and overcome. And so we took an options-based response. We put it through the lens and a filter of very easy language to kind of understand. And then what is not going to be scary for kids and what's going to be trauma informed for the teachers. And through a multidisciplinary team of law enforcement and educators and school psychologists, we kind of came up not only with the acronym, the response, but also actually how do you teach kids through it. And we took the angle of, let's create it like a curriculum and let
Hmm.
teachers teach the kids. And just like
Yeah.
they teach everything else, we're not going to do it like there was some of the programs where like a police officer comes in and teaches them, or you have a guest speaker that comes in. It's not catchy. It doesn't stick because especially in elementary school, all these kids learn all their life skills from their teacher, and that's the vehicle in which they're used to receiving information and learning information, and
Right.
it's very comfortable. So we really took a safety program and built it around a curricula that made it feel like it's an English lesson or a history lesson or a math lesson. It feels very lesson-y-ish, and it's in a manner in which the kids are used to receiving information. And
Yeah.
so the program was built out around that from preschool all the way through high school, and it's taught by teachers across the country. And it creates not only, it checks the box of school safety, it checks, when we
Hmm.
do drills, we have hero drills instead of, and we have a whole methodology of like, that way it's not like scary, it's trauma informed and all these other things. But it also creates this culture of safety across the district, not only for the kids and the teachers, right? Because teachers get training, but the parents. We include the parents in it, and the parents have stuff that they get to do at home with the kids. There's parent information. There's a forthcoming parent app where the parents can engage in the stories and the narratives and the parent version of lessons. Like, it's a community response, right? It's not just a one single thing is going to solve all of our violent problems. So a lot of it's response, and these older kids, we talk about prevention, how do we even prevent types of violence and what to look for? And it's okay to say your friends may be in some crisis and let's get some help before something happens. So we address kind of a lot of those safety driven things in an environment that they're used to, and in conversations that are led that have been designed so that it's a comfortable, safe environment to speak. And so now, instead of you have a drill and it's scary and young kids are crying and there's all these issues and they go and talk to mom and the parents are upset now because now all of a sudden it becomes like this empowering thing, right? We built on empowerment theory and all these other kind of pedagogies and things that are core to education. So they actually are excited to talk about safety. Like, it seems very easy. We've seen it reduce anxiety around talking about these things. There is good language to use, right? So their program is really a encapsulation of how do we talk to kids and our teachers about safety.
Yeah. So this has been really informative. So thank you so much. Just it's a final question. If you could make one request of school security departments everywhere, what would it be?
Limited to just one? Oh, okay.
You can do a couple, it's fine.
One I would say is take a overhead or all hazards kind of approach to things, right? I think so many security directors and having worked with a lot of security directors and continue really being partners in safety a lot. Security directors I always say they're almost like the dumping ground or the miscellaneous department, because when no one's really sure where anything should go, it either ends up in facilities or security, or sometimes the facilities and security director are one and the same.
Right.
And everyone I talk to is constantly chasing what I call like the shiny object, right? Whatever's coming from the district or whatever's coming from the school and whatever the hot button topic is, whatever a parent called about. And they're always chasing these topics and trying to solve one. It's like a whack-a-mole. Like, they get one and then another one pops up, another one pops up. And it's sometimes it's hard for them to kind of take a step back, instead of working kind of in their school, working on their school and taking that, all right, we have this broad approach. These are all the different things I'm going to be responsible for. These are all the things and systems that we're going to start to put in place. And as these things pop up, it should find itself within one of the systems, kind of within the overarching kind of project management, so to speak, of this thing to start to work it out. And I just see so many security directors get bogged down in the details, and they actually can't formulate a really good forward-thinking, overarching all hazards plan, because they were so much in the weeds of just trying to deal with certain things. And so, and it has to happen, right? I know the theory versus the practice, right? But to keep that mindset in mind, that, to take a step back sometimes and let's look at the overarching approach of everything that we have, and to start to really create the strategies around these things is kind of the advice. Like, I get it. It's a crazy job for almost all of them. But to keep in mind, at the end of the day, we can create the system and the structures and strategy to make this work. So those little tiny things that come up are actually systematized within there.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think heads of security just get really bogged down with just the day-to-day emergencies, and to take a step back is definitely the ideal. Well, it's been great to have you, Adam. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, this has been fantastic. Like I said, covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and security is one of those topics that's never going to go away, and it's constantly evolving. So really enjoyed the opportunity to kind of speak a little bit through some of the, especially the school safety things, and maybe see where we're going to get to go with some of these emerging technologies and kind of where the world's taking us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Security Heroes is brought to you by Athena Security. To find out more about Athena Security and how we help save lives through our weapon detection solution, visit www.athena-security.com. And then make sure to search for Security Heroes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Athena, thanks for listening.